You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another podcast of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Well, glad to have you on board. I hope you're doing well. If you're wondering what our podcast is all about, well, we're all about all things technical related to the vertebrate pest management field. So that means we do some deep dives into topics that you're not ordinarily going to hear from other locations, because we are surveying some of the literature and research that's out there to give you information that you won't find likely from anywhere else. And so we work hard at trying to become vetted and peer-reviewed research materials so that we're not going to be selling snake oil, so to speak. Yeah, we're going to be talking more about snakes today. Just want to talk a little about my website, of course, and so you can visit there at Wildlife Control Consultant, and there are materials there for training that you can purchase, or if you want to get a consultation or have me speak at your location or speak on a Zoom call, you can reach out to me there as well. One of the books I'm particularly proud of is the Wildlife Damage Inspection Handbook. If you want to get into some technical information on how to identify, both learn how the process of wildlife damage identification. This is not your typical book about here's a footprint about out in the woods. No, this is about wildlife damage. This is with the interface between humans and animals in that urban-suburban setting. So we're looking at how animals show their presence or reveal their presence in human-impacted environments. And so if you want to learn the process of inspection, how to look for signs, because if you're guessing about what a problem is, then you're wasting a lot of time, and you really want to try to up your game. And so if you're looking for a book to do that, this is the one for you, the Wildlife Damage Inspection Handbook, 3rd edition. It's available both from me, you can get it on Lulu, you can get it on Amazon, and I believe there's another location out there as well that you can purchase it. So check it out. It is for professionals and those interested in recognizing wildlife damage in a human-impacted environment. All right, well, let me pull up my PowerPoint here. We are continuing. This will be my last presentation on snake repellents for the time being. So we're kind of closing this out at this point. And so this is my 3rd presentation on snake repellents, because again, the phobias about snakes are truly amazing, right? In terms of it is striking, just the level of fear that so many people have about snakes. I'm not talking about caution. I'm not talking about being respectful, but just the absolute phobia, the fear that goes beyond the reality of the risk, at least here in America. Now, if you're over in some of the, Southeast Asia, Africa, some South America, there's some nasty snakes out there in terms of their venom. And so I could certainly have greater sensitivity and appreciation for the fear of snakes in those environments, because you get bit by them, you're dead. But that is pretty hard in America to have a native-born snake. I'm not talking about the import trade, not talking about the pet trade here, but for our snakes in America, for us to die from a snake bite in America, typically speaking, is because we were doing something we shouldn't be doing. It's sort of like, lions are dangerous, but the people who died are the ones who were feeding them. Well, obviously that's an inherently dangerous activity, right? So it's not that I want, not wishing ill will for the zookeepers that are tending to these animals. No, but the point is that's a different situation than what happens when people, hold my beer as I go after this rattlesnake, for example. That's where we're talking about people who are getting bit, and some of those people unfortunately die. But even in situations where people don't die, sometimes the morbidity that's morbidity, that's where they're losing part of the function of their body. They're just not as well as they were before. It's just sort of injury to their body. That can be quite severe in certain circumstances as well. So The search for a snake repellent that actually works is out there. There isn't enough research being done in the area, in my opinion. But the fact of the matter is, if you followed the past two podcasts, things are not looking that promising. But we'll take a look at the research that we have today. So the article was published by Larry Clark and John Shivik. These are two gentlemen in USDA Wildlife Services in the research branch. And if you're not familiar with wildlife services, sometimes wildlife services gets bashed by the animal rights protest industry. They're just killing animals. But there's actually two parts to wildlife services. You have the research side, which is about 10% of their budget. And those are individuals who are usually have advanced academic degrees in research, and they're looking for methods and tools to manage human wildlife conflicts. And so when people are sometimes, banging the cage, sort of trying to scream about the government killing wildlife, you need to ask them, are you not wanting this particular research? Now, in my opinion, the research done by the USDA by the National Wildlife Research Center is focused too much on non-lethal methods. And that's my opinion, right? Because I think a lot of these, but they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time on so-called non-lethal research. And this is part of that. And now I'm not saying they shouldn't do any of it, but they feel the political pressure as well. They have their finger in the wind because as a government agency, they have to obviously be beholden to the taxpayers. But unfortunately, it's a small group of people, agitators, who are pushing some of this agenda. And I just think that a lot of these routes are really ultimately dead ends. And so we really should be putting some research into, can we find another rodenticide? Can we find other products that would work, and maybe even some mechanical tools that could be worked. And so I mean, that's just my political commentary there. Take it for what you will, but nevertheless, this is part of their work on looking at trying to find a repellent for a very key snake known as the brown tree snake. Now, if you're not familiar with the brown tree snake, and of course most of us in America are not, it is a venomous snake that is in Guam, and it's a non-native snake. It was brought to Guam, they believe, either during the Second World War, because it was a location where materials were being supplied during the Second World War. It's the war with Japan. And also, or it could have occurred after that time. And so the belief is that one of these snakes or a few of these snakes got onto planes or into cargo and ultimately came off the plane in Guam, and it's just been devastating. I think it created several species of animals that are now extinct on Guam because it's an arboreal snake. It goes up into the trees. And it's really it's really a hassle, right? Because it does have some venom, it does have a nasty bite, and it's all over the place, right? And so what they don't want is this snake being transferred from Guam like to Hawaii. That would be devastating, right? And so the military there, because we do have a big military base in Guam, because Guam is a territory of the United States, and we don't want that to come. So Wildlife Services has been tasked to look into some ways to try to prevent this sort of thing. They've done some research on how to poison brown tree snakes using Tylenol of all things, which is kind of interesting. That's a subject for another podcast. But they are also looking at these essential oils. And you're saying, well, why would they want these essential oils? Well, they're looking at essential oils because it'd be much easier to register with the EPA if they could find something that would work sufficiently. So the brown tree snakes. All right, so I've gotten a little ahead of myself here. So let's give you the article title here. So it is Larry Clark, John Shivik. These are the authors. I'm more familiar with John Shivik. Shivik has done some great research in wildlife damage management. So absolutely, whenever you see an article by him, you want to read it. The title of the article is Aerosolized Essential Oils and individual natural product compounds as brown tree snake repellents. It was published in Pest Management Science, Volume 58, published in 2002, pages 775 to 783. And if you're wanting the DOI, which is a faster way to get to it, the DOI is 10.1002 / PS.525. So that's 10.1002 / PS.525. And that's aerosolized essential oils and individual natural product compounds as brown tree snake repellents. So, interesting article. So let's take a look. Now, I've already mentioned some of the challenges with the brown tree snake, and here's some pictures of the brown tree snake. As you can see, it has the cat eye, so that's one of the indicators that this is a venomous snake. And again, it's invasive to Guam, and the people there suffer with it. They've had to learn how to deal with this particular snake, but it's all over the place. And they have 50 to 100 snakes per hectare. Now, if you're not familiar with a hectare, it's about 2.5 acres. Think about that for a moment. 50 to 100 snakes per every 2.5 acres. You say, well, how could they get such densities? Well, because the snake lives in the trees. And so it is quite an issue. And some of the challenges of the snake, of course, is it causes power outages because snakes will make the connection between, the line and the ground, right? And it also caused several extinctions, and it's still there today. And we need to get rid of this snake, right? So this is a bad thing to have there. It doesn't belong there, and it's a bad deal. So what they're trying to do is they were trying to find something that could be used to prevent snakes from moving into equipment that was then going to be transferred to other states or other countries from the area of Guam. And if they were able to find something that could be sort of a barrier on snakes and to prevent them from getting to the cargo, that would be huge. Now, on the other side, if they could find a way that if they knew a snake was in the equipment, if they could spray a product that would flush the snake, that would be important as well. So that would be because then it wouldn't, because trying to find a snake when you're dealing with shipping packages and shipping pallets of material, the snake could be almost anywhere, right? Doesn't take much. They can coil up pretty small. They can get into small corners in the dark places. But if you can flush them out of there, then you can have greater assurance that the snake isn't in there. You're not going to transfer it to another location, right? So this is kind of what they're looking for. So they basically developed a test where they would squirt the product onto the snake and see if it reacted. Now, what they wanted to do is they wanted to be sure that snakes weren't simply fleeing from being sprayed, right? In other words, they wanted to be sure that it was a chemical activity rather than just the physical feeling of being sprayed by something, right? If you ever have a cat and you spray water on your cat, the cat doesn't like it. Well, even though the water's not harming harming your cat, the cat doesn't like it, so it's going to flee the water. Well, they didn't want that. So what they did is they took the snakes that they had and they sprayed them with water to make sure they didn't react simply to the water. So they only used snakes in the study that weren't reacting physically to the water. Okay, those that passed became subjects of the trial, and then they wanted to spray them with using an emulsifier with these active ingredients. And so they classified the snake's movements in the following way. So VM meant violent motion. In other words, you sprayed it and it's just wreathing all over the place. That would be violent motion. SM would be small motions. In other words, you spray it and it may just sort of creep away or move a little bit slowly. LAT stands for latency, and that's how long did it take for the snake to begin its first movement after it was sprayed. And that was calculated in seconds. And then TOT was the total amount of time that the snake was moving. In other words, did the snake move violently for 5 seconds or a minute or longer than that? And then they're testing two ways here. They began testing with the natural oils. That's like you go to a grocery store and pick up, let's say, cinnamon oil. Okay, that's the natural oil. And then they decided to see if they could find what would be the primary ingredient in that natural oil and test that. That's called the regent, right? So that would be the specific chemical that gives that natural oil maybe its greatest odor or something like that, and they would test that. So it was a two-part test. And so what were their results? Well, I'm sorry for this particular slide. They tested a lot of different products, but let me kind of break it down for you here a little bit. Hopefully you can see my cursor. Okay, so here they have the extracts that they were using here in the left. Now you notice water was one of the products they tested. That's their control, right? You notice how there was no initial behavior, right? So the snakes did not react to the water on any kit. So it's all 0 or blank all the way across. And they tested 10 snakes with that. But when they tested wintergreen oil, okay, what was the initial behavior of the snakes? That, remember, they're aerosolizing this oil. It's not just a liquid that they poured onto it. They would spray it, okay? And now the snakes only had small movements that were treated, and so it took 48 seconds for the snake to begin to move. Okay, so that's probably not something you want to necessarily use. Well, compare that with an oil of anise. Here we have violent motion, and it only took them 13 seconds to begin to move. Okay, and their duration of their vigorous movement was 122 seconds, so almost 2 minutes. And then they calculated the duration of their slow movement, because they tire out, and that was almost 2 minutes in and of itself. Okay, so you can see here that they had a lot of products here that had violent motion, but some had really long initial latencies. Now, look at oil of capsaicin. Here we have 296 minutes before the snake began to react. Not minutes, seconds, sorry, 296 seconds. Okay, and then it had no duration of vigorous movement and only 4 seconds of slow movement, right? So basically, we know that oil of capsaicin is not going to work, right? It's not going to do anything. So they found some that they thought were useful here. And so then of this particular group, and so the ones that they found had some effect were, oil of anise, cedarwood oil, cinnamon oil, citronella oil, clary sage oil, grapefruit oil, juniper berry oil, lavender oil, pennyroyal oil, rosemary oil, and that's pretty much about it. Now, what they found, of course, was in terms of their results, I've already said, 2 extremes here, right? So we have oil of cedarwood, prolonged, violent, undirected, vigorous movement. Then oil of ginger, slow, directed, investigatory movement. Interestingly, 2 snakes died that were exposed to cinnamon oil, and so all the other snakes survived for at least 5 days with no signs of morbidity. But those 2 snakes that died actually died from bleeding in their lungs, which is interesting. So again, we had extremes, right? Capsaicin, no arousal. Pennyroyal oil, weak arousal, right? So their results were varied, to be sure. Products that did not work. Natural products that did not work was water, of course, oil of capsaicin, and then yucca. Those 3 did not work at all. So once they found the products that did have a reaction to snakes, they then went to the second test where they were trying to find the primary ingredient, or what they called the regent, of those natural products, and then tested those. You can see here in this list, hopefully you can see this if you're watching, they gave you the CAS number. CAS number is a universal international number given to specific chemicals as a way to standardize things across the world. So they give you the CAS number here, and so they have products like amyl acetate, geraniol, eugenol, linalool, methone, methylphenolate, methyl salicylate, nerol, apinine, a-terapinine. So a variety of different products here. Again, the same letters that they use: VM for violent motion, SM for small motion, and then of course none. So some of the products didn't work at all. Cinnamonic acid had no reaction. Okay, so that's not going to work. Geraniol had no reaction, so that's not going to go. And then some of the products had some reactions, but not with all of the snakes. And you can see the N here. The N stands for the number of snakes that were tested. Now, just a reminder, they're only testing brown tree snakes here. Okay, so how much this material would impact other snakes, other species of snakes, it's unclear. So don't just go to the grocery store and buy this stuff and start squirting around your house to see if you can keep snakes away. Do not do that. Okay, that's not only illegal, it's dangerous and not very wise at all. Okay, so don't do that. But you can see that not all the products had 100% reacting. So with the amyl acetate, for example, they tested 14 snakes. All of them reacted, and they reacted quickly because the latency time was only 3 seconds. So once the snake got exposed to it, 3 seconds later, it was moving, and it was moving violently for 25 seconds afterwards. And then for its small movements, it was 42 seconds, and then total movement was 69. Now, some, like M-anisaldehyde, that's quite a word, 100% of the snakes tested reacted. The latency time was only 10 seconds, but they had a violent motion for 44 seconds, and the duration of small movements for 179 seconds. So it's almost a minute and a half, and the total movement time was 200 and almost 4 minutes here. Okay, so that's amazing. Okay, so you can see camphor as another product. It had basically no effect. Okay, even though they have initial movement as violent, it just didn't seem to really do anything. Okay, so that's not going to work. Violent movement, but the reacting percent was basically 0 for some reason. Okay, so that's not really going to be very helpful. Methylphenolate, only 86% or 87% reacted to it. Methyl salicylate, 100% reacted. And so they found these specific regents, these specific chemicals that could be used as flushing agents. And again, a flushing agent is an agent where you would spray into an area to drive a snake away from an area. It's not a repellent in the sense that most people use the term repellent, where they want something to be a barrier to prevent the animal from crossing. This is a flushing agent where the animal could be somewhere and you want to get it out of that area. So it's a flushing agent. So there's really not a lot of use for this in terms of the public. There would be a potential use of this in wildlife control. Let's say you had a situation where you had a hibernaculum and you wanted to get that hibernaculum cleared out of snakes. If you had a product that you could spray inside the hibernaculum to drive those snakes out, that would be something that could be useful. But again, it's a very limited use. Now, keep in mind, none of these products are EPA registered at this time, so it's not really legal for you to use them. So, well, how could they do it? Well, they would have gotten a permit. And also being a federal agency, they would have this permit. For example, in my other job that I have the ability to do certain testing of chemical products, and you can get this license as well. It's not a requirement to be a government worker to do this. And just to be clear, I'm not talking on the basis of my job as a government worker today, okay? My point is that you as a private citizen can apply for what's called a research permit if you wish to do some of this study yourself. That way you're going to be legal. And as long as you are testing in a manner that's under 10 acres, you don't have to file all of these EPA requirements, but you're allowed to do a study in under 10 acres. And so there's additional information. So you can test certain things to find out. That would be the initial step in getting a product registered. Now, the benefit of these products is that because they are quote unquote natural, and that is they're not a petroleum product, they don't have to be generated from, they're from plants and essential oils that are used in food items even today, it would be easier to get them registered with the EPA. In other words, so if you're familiar with 25B products, 25B products are minimum risk products that have been designated by the EPA. And they have a list, you could look it up online if you wish, where these chemicals do not have to go through the millions of dollars of testing to be used. And that's why when you go to the hardware store and you find all of these quote unquote repellents and products out there, and you're like, well, why can't I find an EPA registration number? Well, because those are 25B products. And if you look at the active ingredients, they're things that some of the things that we just have eaten, right? So it's part of our normal diet. Or we've had such a long history with them that the EPA has said, no, we don't need to go through the millions of dollars of testing. Well, that would be one benefit of some of these essential oils if someone decided to pursue marketing or doing further research to see if these could be brought to market. However, before, like I said, don't just go to the store or go to a chemical company and purchase these products and think you're going to start playing around with them, because understand that they're not registered right now. There's more research that needs to be done, particularly in the area of human, animal, and equipment safety. You say, well, what do I mean by that? And that is, we don't know what some of the risks of these products are to people when they're used sometimes in pure form. In other words, there's a difference between an essential oil that's in its natural state versus one that's where we're only extracting out the specific active ingredient of that essential oil. Also, some of these essential oils can be irritating to skin, irritating to our lungs when they're being aerosolized or used in great volumes, right? And so you want to be careful, right? So this is why I want to be sure. I'm going to emphasize again, just don't go to the store and say, oh, this was a successful flushing agent, and I'm going to start spraying it around on my garter snakes to get rid of them. Do not do that. Okay, that is very dangerous. We also don't know what the effects are, long-term effects are on the snakes themselves. You may say you don't care, but other people do care, and I hope that you would care, right? If we're going to use something as a repellent, we don't want to have long-term damage to the animal that it's treating. So there would need to be some work on there. Now, in terms of the work that these researchers did, none of the snakes showed injury for 5 days, except, but notice, two of the snakes did die when exposed to cinnamon oil, right? So it tells you that some of these products can be quite caustic, and sometimes it's not so much that there's a chemical in there that's causing the injury. Sometimes it's the pH of the product. In other words, it's just too acidic or it's too basic, and when it's aerosolized and breathed into the lungs, you could be harming. It's just like the idea of heat. Heat is not a poison, but if you get too much heat in your body, you can burn your lungs when you're exposed to hot air, for example. Same way with these essential oils. And then we don't know what the effect is on some of the equipment. So if you're dealing with something that's basic or acidic and you're spraying this around equipment that could decay and degrade the equipment around, last thing you would want if someone had a snake in their living room and you're spraying an essential oil and all of a sudden the color of their couch turns weird, right? Or it bleaches the color of their couch, or it fries the electrical outlet because there's too much acidity or there's too much basic there. So these are the types of things that would have to be investigated. Or if you had someone pass out because they were exposed, because, oh, it's natural, it must be safe. Don't believe that. Just because something is natural does not mean that it's safe. Okay, that is certainly not the case. And then just a reminder that sometimes these products can be hazardous to people because, again, we know that 2 snakes died when exposed to cinnamon oil, right? So, bottom line is we haven't found anything yet. We have some things that have shown some promise as a flushing agent, but there's nothing out there yet. So, if you want to do some research on your own, get licensed, talk to your state's Department of Agriculture, and get yourself a pesticide research permit, and go for it. We definitely need more people to be doing some type of research, and perhaps reach out to your university, maybe the entomology department or the wildlife department, and to ask them, hey, you're willing to help in this particular regard. They might be interested, particularly if there's some money. Maybe there's a large wildlife control firm out there that's looking to get into this particular area. So, but again, there's ideas out there, but there's no real path. I don't think this is a get rich quick scheme at all. And so it's going to take some work, which is why there hasn't been a lot more done in this particular area. All right. Well, I wish I had better news for you to some degree, but I just hope that this helps you understand when you're seeing things used in products. You may say, well, where did they get this idea from? Sometimes, manufacturers may read some of the literature or come across it and say, well, we're just going to throw this in here as a repellent. But doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for your situation. Of course, if you look at all 3 podcasts that I've done, including this one, you can see nothing's really become a silver bullet when it comes to repellents, or in this case, a flushing agent for snakes. More work needs to be done. So be careful out there and make sure you're following the law and make sure you're being safe. And again, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to the Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast, where we cover all things technical related to vertebrate pest management. Do take a few moments, if you would, to tell us how we're doing. Do ring the bell and subscribe to the channel. We'd also love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Comments, thoughts, suggestions for future shows, and yes, even criticisms. If you're interested in being on the show, definitely take a few moments and look at our video on how to be on the show. It's published around June of 2025, and it'll be available in both Rumble and on YouTube. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have guests on our show. We think that there is a lot of information out there that needs to be transmitted to a wider audience. All right, well, that's it for me this week. Again, Happy New Year, everyone. Take care.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.